I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the sickening crunch of metal against wood, followed by the screech of tires spinning uselessly on ice. The blizzard that had been battering northern Michigan for the past 18 hours showed no signs of letting up, and visibility outside my living room window was maybe 20 feet on a good minute. I set down my mug and peered through the curtains just in time to see a silver Lexus SUV with its front end wrapped around what used to be my mailbox. Snow swirling so thick I could barely make out the license plate. My name is Owen Parrish, and I had lived in the Pinewood Heights subdivision outside Traverse City for exactly 3 years. 3 years of increasingly absurd HOA violations, passive-aggressive letters about the height of my grass being a quarter-inch too tall, and complaints about my truck being parked in my own driveway because apparently it was not aesthetically pleasing enough for the neighborhood standards. But this was something else entirely. I pulled on my boots and winter coat, bracing myself against the Arctic wind as I pushed open my front door. Snow immediately whipped into my face, stinging like tiny needles. The temperature had to be somewhere around -5, not counting the wind chill. I trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the street, where the Lexus was still running, its wheels spinning pathetically as the driver tried to reverse. As I got closer, I recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Brenda Morrison, the president of our HOA and the most insufferable human being I had ever had the misfortune of knowing. She was 52 years old, had that signature Karen haircut that somehow defied both gravity and common sense, and she wore her position of petty authority like a crown. I had received no fewer than 15 violation notices from her in the past year alone, each one more ridiculous than the last. I knocked on her window and she jumped, clearly not expecting anyone to materialize out of the whiteout conditions. She rolled down the window about 2 inches, just enough for her voice to escape. "Owen, thank goodness," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I seem to have encountered a slight obstacle. Could you help me get unstuck?" I looked at the mangled remains of my mailbox, its post snapped clean in half, the box itself crushed under her front bumper. "Brenda, you just destroyed my mailbox." She waved her hand dismissively, as if I had just pointed out a minor scuff on her shoe. "Oh, that old thing. Well, these conditions are absolutely treacherous. No one should be expected to see properly in this weather. Now, are you going to help me or not?" I felt my jaw tighten. "First, we need to exchange insurance information. You hit my property." Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. "Insurance? Owen, do not be dramatic. This is an act of God. The weather is responsible, not me. Besides, your mailbox was clearly not up to code. I have been meaning to send you a violation notice about it anyway." "My mailbox was fine," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the howling wind. "And it was definitely up to code because I had it inspected last summer after your 3rd complaint about it. You have the report in your files." Brenda's expression soured. "Well, regardless, I expect the HOA will need to review this incident. For now, I really must get home. Gerald is expecting me for lunch." She rolled up her window before I could respond and gunned the engine. The SUV lurched backward with a grinding sound, leaving chunks of my mailbox embedded in her front grille. She fishtailed slightly, then disappeared into the white curtain of snow, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the damage, though the blizzard made it difficult to capture clear images. The mailbox post was completely destroyed. The box itself was bent beyond recognition, and there were tire tracks and debris scattered across my front yard. I gathered what pieces I could find and hauled them back to my garage. my fingers going numb despite my insulated gloves. Back inside, I cranked up the heat and made myself another cup of coffee while I drafted an email to Brenda with the photos attached. I kept it professional, simply stating the facts and requesting her insurance information so I could file a claim. I hit send and figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 hours later, as the blizzard finally started to ease up, I received a response. But it was not from Brenda. It was from the entire HOA board, CC'd to every homeowner in Pinewood Heights. The subject line read, "Violation Notice and Special Assessment, 2847 Oak Ridge Drive." My address. I opened the email with a growing sense of dread. "Dear Mr. Parrish," it began, in that overly formal tone Brenda loved to use. "It has come to the attention of the HOA board that your mailbox is currently in a state of severe disrepair and does not meet the aesthetic standards set forth in Section 7.3 of the Pinewood Heights Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. You are hereby notified that you have 72 hours to repair or replace the mailbox to bring it into compliance, or you will be subject to fines of $100 per day until the issue is resolved. Additionally, the board has determined that the deteriorated state of your mailbox contributed to an incident earlier today. As such, you are being assessed a special fee of $1,250 to cover the insurance deductible for repairs to the vehicle damaged by your non-compliant mailbox. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property." I read the email 3 times, certain I had to be misunderstanding something. Brenda was actually trying to bill me for her insurance deductible after she crashed into my mailbox. Not only that, but she was threatening to fine me for not immediately replacing the mailbox she had destroyed during an active blizzard that had the entire county under a state of emergency. I called my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 houses down and had served on the HOA board before Brenda staged what could only be described as a hostile takeover 2 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Please tell me you did not get that insane email from Brenda," I said without preamble. Marcus groaned. "I did. Owen, this is beyond even her usual level of crazy. She cannot charge you for her own accident. Can she fine me for not fixing the mailbox immediately? We are literally in the middle of a blizzard warning. Technically, the CCRs do have language about mailbox maintenance, but any reasonable interpretation would account for weather conditions and who is actually at fault for the damage. This is ridiculous. You need to fight this." I thanked Marcus and hung up, then immediately started researching Michigan property law and HOA regulations. What I found was both encouraging and infuriating. Brenda was absolutely in the wrong, but fighting an HOA could be expensive and time-consuming. They had the power to place liens on properties, and while those liens could be challenged in court, it required legal representation that I was not sure I could afford. The next morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind 2 feet of fresh snow and crystal-clear skies. I spent 3 hours digging out my driveway and clearing a path to the street. The remains of my mailbox looked even worse in the bright sunlight, a twisted sculpture of metal and wood that testified to the force of Brenda's impact. I was just finishing up when a Traverse City police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. My stomach dropped. Had Brenda actually called the police, the officer who stepped out was a woman in her mid-30s with a no-nonsense demeanor. Her nameplate read, "Sergeant Delgado, Owen Parrish." She asked, "That's me. Is there a problem, officer?" She pulled out a small notebook. "I received a report about a motor vehicle accident at this address yesterday during the storm. A Mrs. Brenda Morrison claims that your mailbox was illegally positioned and caused damage to her vehicle. She is requesting that we file an official report for her insurance claim. I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice level. Officer, Brenda Morrison crashed into my mailbox during the blizzard. I have photos of the damage. She fled the scene without providing insurance information and is now trying to blame me and charge me for her deductible. Sergeant Delgado's expression shifted slightly. She fled the scene. She left without exchanging information, yes. I asked for her insurance details, and she refused and drove away. The officer made several notes. Do you have those photos? I pulled out my phone and showed her the images I had taken, along with the timestamp proving they were taken immediately after the incident. I also showed her the email Brenda had sent to the entire neighborhood. Sergeant Delgado's jaw tightened as she read. Mr. Parrish, I am going to be honest with you. This looks like a clear case of a driver losing control during bad weather and hitting a stationary object, then attempting to avoid responsibility. Your mailbox appears to be in a standard location. Is it possible that Mrs. Morrison was driving too fast for conditions? I heard her engine revving pretty hard before the impact, I said. And she was definitely speeding earlier in the week. She always speeds through the neighborhood. The officer handed me a card. I am going to file a report based on what you have told me and the photographic evidence. I will also be visiting Mrs. Morrison to get her statement. In the meantime, you may want to file a claim with your homeowner's insurance and let them pursue her for damages. And Mr. Parrish, if she is trying to extort money from you, that could be a separate issue. Document everything. After Sergeant Delgado left, I called my insurance company. The claims adjuster I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that since it was vehicle versus stationary property, I would need to go through Brenda's auto insurance, not my homeowner's policy. However, she gave me some advice that proved invaluable. Mr. Parrish, if this person is refusing to provide insurance information and is attempting to charge you for damage you did not cause, you have a few options. You can file a police report, which it sounds like you have done. You can also send her a formal demand letter requiring her to provide insurance information within a specific time frame, or you will pursue legal action. And if she is acting in her capacity as an HOA representative, you may want to consult with an attorney about whether this constitutes harassment or abuse of her position. I thanked her and hung up, then did something I probably should have done years ago. I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Richard Kozlowski, and he had offices right in Traverse City. His receptionist was able to squeeze me in for a consultation that afternoon. Richard Kozlowski was a man in his early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested he had seen every dirty trick in the book. I laid out the entire situation for him, from the accident to the email to the police visit. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Mr. Parrish, what Mrs. Morrison is attempting is called abuse of authority, and depending on how far she pushes this, it could cross into criminal territory. She cannot charge you for her insurance deductible. That is not how liability works. As for the fines, the CCRs likely do give the HOA some ability to enforce property standards, but they cannot enforce them in a way that is arbitrary, capricious, or discriminatory. Fining you for not replacing a mailbox that she destroyed during a blizzard while simultaneously claiming you owe her money for the accident. A judge would throw that out in about 5 minutes. So what do? I asked. First, you are going to send a formal response to the HOA board, copying all the homeowners, just like she did. You are going to lay out exactly what happened. Attach the police report once you have it, and make it clear that you will not be paying any special assessment or fines related to this incident. Second, you are going to send Mrs. Morrison a demand letter requiring her insurance information within 10 business days. Third, if she does not comply, we are going to file a lawsuit for the damages to your mailbox and for harassment. And fourth, you are going to start documenting every interaction you have with this woman, because I suspect this is not going to end quietly. I left Richard's office feeling better than I had in days. I spent that evening drafting the response email, carefully laying out the timeline of events and making it clear that Brenda had been at fault. I attached the photos and mentioned that a police report had been filed. I sent it just before midnight, copying the entire neighborhood just as she had done. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the time I woke up the next morning, I had 17 emails from neighbors expressing support and sharing their own horror stories about Brenda's reign of terror. Apparently, I was far from the only person she had harassed. Marcus called me around 9 in the morning. "Owen, you have started a revolution. People are talking about calling for a special meeting to remove Brenda from the board. Can they do that?" I asked. "According to the bylaws, yes. If 15% of homeowners sign a petition, we can force a special election. And buddy, you have got way more than 15% ready to sign right now." Over the next few days, a petition began circulating through Pinewood Heights. What had started as my personal nightmare with a destroyed mailbox was turning into a full-scale revolt against Brenda's leadership. People were coming forward with stories of excessive fines, selective enforcement of rules, and generally abusive behavior. Meanwhile, Brenda was doubling down. She sent another email threatening immediate legal action if I did not pay the special assessment. She claimed that my defamatory email to the neighborhood had damaged her reputation, and that she was considering a lawsuit for slander. Richard Kozlowski laughed when I forwarded it to him. "She has no case. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Let her try. In the meantime, I am going to file for a restraining order to prevent the HOA from placing any liens on your property related to this incident." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Sergeant Delgado visited me again with an update. "Mr. Parrish, I wanted you to know that I spoke with Mrs. Morrison. Her story has changed 3 times now. First, she claimed your mailbox jumped out in front of her. Then she said you had deliberately positioned it to cause accidents. Now she is claiming that you have been harassing her and that the accident never happened the way you described. She also refuses to provide her insurance information to you, which is technically a violation of Michigan law when it comes to property damage accidents." "What happens now?" I asked. "I have submitted my report to the prosecutor's office. They will decide whether to pursue charges for leaving the scene of an accident. It is a civil infraction in Michigan, but given her attempts to evade responsibility, they may decide to take action. I have also noted in my report that she appears to be abusing her position with the HOA to retaliate against you." The restraining order hearing arrived, and I found myself sitting in a Grand Traverse County courtroom across from Brenda and the HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Timothy Walsh, who kept mopping his forehead with a handkerchief despite the cool temperature. Judge Patricia Drummond presided, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Richard presented our case methodically, walking through the timeline of events, the photographic evidence, the email threatening fines and special assessments, and the police report. When it was the HOA's turn, Timothy Walsh stood up and immediately looked like he regretted taking this case. Your Honor, the HOA maintains that Mr. Parrish's mailbox was not in compliance with community standards, and that his failure to maintain his property contributed to the accident. Judge Drummond held up a hand. Counselor, I have read the filings. Is your client, Mrs. Morrison, claiming that Mr. Parrish's mailbox caused her to lose control of her vehicle during a blizzard? The mailbox was positioned in a way that made it difficult to avoid, Walsh said weakly. It was in the standard location for mailboxes, was it not? At the edge of the property, where the Postal Service requires it to be. Well, yes, and Mrs. Morrison was driving during a blizzard with visibility of less than 50 feet, correct? The roads were still passable. Counselor, the entire county was under a state of emergency. The roads were not passable. They were dangerous. And your client chose to drive anyway, lost control, hit a stationary object, and then attempted to blame the property owner and charge him for her insurance deductible. Is that an accurate summary? Timothy Walsh looked at Brenda, who was turning an interesting shade of red. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison believes. I am not interested in what Mrs. Morrison believes. I am interested in facts and the law. The facts are clear. Mrs. Morrison caused damage to Mr. Parrish's property and is now attempting to use her position with the HOA to retaliate against him. Not only am I granting the restraining order preventing any fines or liens related to this incident, I am also ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Parrish's legal fees for this hearing. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Michigan Attorney General's office for investigation into potential HOA abuse. The courtroom was silent. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but Walsh put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Judge Drummond was not finished. Mrs. Morrison, you are an adult and a leader in your community. You have a responsibility to act with integrity. What you have done here is petty, vindictive, and potentially illegal. If I see you in my courtroom again for similar behavior, the consequences will be much more severe. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Brenda said through gritted teeth. We left the courtroom, and I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. Richard clapped me on the shoulder. That went even better than I expected. Judge Drummond does not mess around when it comes to HOA overreach. But the saga was far from over. The petition to remove Brenda from the HOA board had gathered signatures from nearly 40% of the neighborhood. A special meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community clubhouse. I arrived early to find the parking lot already packed. The meeting room, which usually held maybe 30 people comfortably, had at least 70 residents crammed inside. Marcus had volunteered to moderate, and he called the meeting to order with a gavel that looked like it had been borrowed from someone's kid's toy collection. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began. We are here today to vote on whether to remove Brenda Morrison from her position as HOA president and from the board entirely. Before we vote, Mrs. Morrison has the opportunity to address the community. Brenda stood up, and I could see she had prepared a speech. She unfolded a piece of paper and began reading in a shaky voice. I have served this community for 6 years, she said. I have dedicated countless hours to maintaining property values and ensuring that Pinewood Heights remains a desirable place to live. The recent accusations against me are unfounded and hurtful. Yes, there was an unfortunate incident with Mr. Parrish's mailbox, but I was simply trying to hold him accountable to the same standards we all agreed to when we moved here. If you remove me today, you are sending a message that leadership and accountability do not matter. There was a smattering of uncomfortable silence. Then Janice Porter, an elderly woman who lived on Cedar Lane, stood up. Brenda, You fined me $300 because my granddaughter's chalk drawings on my driveway were visible from the street. They were here for 2 days before it rained. My granddaughter was 8 years old. That is not leadership. That is cruelty. Another hand went up. David Sutton, a man in his 40s who worked as an engineer. You sent me a violation notice because my garbage cans were visible from the street at 7 in the morning on trash day. The trash truck comes at 7:30. Where exactly was I supposed to hide them? More hands went up. Story after story of petty fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, and vindictive behavior. Brenda's face grew redder with each testimony. Finally, Marcus called for the vote. It was not even close. 73% of the homeowners present voted to remove her from the board immediately. Brenda stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out without another word. The room erupted in applause, but Brenda Morrison was not done with me yet. 3 days after being removed from the board, she filed a small claims lawsuit against me for the full cost of her vehicle repairs, claiming that my improperly maintained mailbox had caused the damage. The amount she was seeking was $4,800. Richard looked over the filing and shook his head. She is either delusional or hoping you will settle just to make this go away. We are going to fight this. The small claims hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, I had my mailbox repaired, a process that cost me $270. I submitted the bill to Brenda's insurance company, which I had finally obtained through the police report. They denied my claim, stating that their client disputed liability. I appealed the denial, providing all the documentation I had, including the police report, the judge's order from the restraining order hearing, and witness statements from my neighbors. 3 weeks later, I received a check for the full amount, plus a letter stating that they had determined their client was 100% at fault for the accident. The small claims hearing arrived on a cold but clear March morning. The snow had finally melted, revealing the brown grass and mud that characterized northern Michigan springs. I met Richard outside the courthouse. "Remember," he said, "small claims is informal, but the judge still expects you to be organized and factual. Let her tell her story first, then we will dismantle it piece by piece." Inside the courtroom, Brenda was already seated, dressed in an expensive pantsuit and wearing an expression of grim determination. The judge was a man in his late 50s named Judge Warren Blackwell, and he had a reputation for being fair but impatient with frivolous lawsuits. "Mrs. Morrison," Judge Blackwell said, "you are the plaintiff. Please explain your claim." Brenda stood and launched into a dramatic retelling of the accident that bore almost no resemblance to reality. In her version, she had been driving safely and carefully when my dangerously positioned mailbox appeared out of nowhere and caused extensive damage to her vehicle. She claimed that I had refused to take responsibility and had instead launched a harassment campaign against her that resulted in her being wrongfully removed from the HOA board. Judge Blackwell listened without expression, making occasional notes. When Brenda finished, he turned to me. "Mr. Parrish, your response." I stood and calmly presented the timeline of events, supported by photographs, the police report, Sergeant Delgado's testimony, which she had agreed to provide in writing, the order from Judge Drummond, and the letter from Brenda's own insurance company accepting liability. Judge Blackwell examined each document carefully. Then he looked up at Brenda. "Mrs. Morrison, your own insurance company has accepted fault for this accident. They have paid Mr. Parrish for his damaged mailbox. Why are you pursuing this claim?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed several times. "They were wrong. They did not have all the facts. They had a police report that contradicts your version of events, They had photographic evidence. They had multiple witness statements. What facts do you believe they were missing? Mr. Parrish has been harassing me for years, Brenda said, her voice rising. He has never followed the HOA rules. He parks his truck in his driveway when he should use the garage. His grass is always too long. He painted his front door without getting approval. And now he has turned the entire neighborhood against me. Judge Blackwell held up a hand. Mrs. Morrison, none of that is relevant to the question of who caused this accident. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that you lost control of your vehicle during a snowstorm and struck Mr. Parrish's mailbox, which was properly positioned and maintained. Your claim is denied. Furthermore, I am awarding Mr. Parrish court costs in the amount of $150, which you will pay within 30 days. Brenda looked stunned. But, Your Honor, my decision is final. This hearing is adjourned. I walked out of the courthouse feeling vindicated but exhausted. The entire ordeal had taken nearly 3 months of my life, and while I had won, it had cost me time, energy, and emotional stress that I would never get back. Richard walked me to my truck. Owen, I have been doing this for 20 years, and I have seen a lot of HOA nightmares. What Brenda put you through was extreme even by those standards. The good news is she is off the board now, and she has no power over you anymore. My advice: enjoy your property, follow the reasonable rules, and if she so much as looks at you wrong, call me immediately. I thanked him and drove home, ready to put this all behind me. But the universe apparently had other plans. 2 weeks after the small claims hearing, I received a letter from the Michigan Attorney General's office. They had completed their investigation into the HOA practices under Brenda's leadership and had found multiple violations of Michigan's Nonprofit Corporation Act. The letter stated that they were pursuing civil penalties against Brenda personally for misuse of HOA funds and abuse of authority. Apparently, the deeper they dug, the more they found. Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including her cell phone bill, gas for her vehicle, and even a weekend trip to Mackinac Island that she had claimed was for HOA research purposes. The total amount of misappropriated funds was over $12,000. The new HOA board, which included Marcus as president and several other level-headed neighbors, voted unanimously to pursue criminal charges. In Michigan, embezzlement of that amount was a felony. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings that I watched from the sidelines. Brenda hired a criminal defense attorney and tried to claim that she had simply made accounting errors. But the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA's forensic accountant traced every improper expense, and the pattern was clear. In July, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement and was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution to the HOA. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Michigan for 10 years. The day the sentence was announced, I was replacing a light fixture on my front porch when Marcus walked over. "Did you hear?" he asked. I did. "It is finally over." Marcus leaned against my porch railing. "You know, none of this would have come to light if she had not crashed into your mailbox and then tried to blame you for it. Her ego literally destroyed her." I thought about that for a moment. He was right. If Brenda had simply apologized, exchanged insurance information, and moved on like a normal person, she would still be running the HOA with an iron fist. Instead, her refusal to accept responsibility for a simple accident had triggered a chain of events that exposed years of misconduct. "I guess there is a lesson in there somewhere," I said. "Yeah, do not mess with a man's mailbox during a blizzard." We both laughed, and it felt good. For the first time since that snowy February morning, I felt like I could truly relax in my own home. The following weekend, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years. I hosted a neighborhood barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, and beer in my backyard. Nearly 30 neighbors showed up, and we spent the afternoon swapping stories and getting to know each other in a way that had never been possible under Brenda's oppressive regime. Janice Porter brought her famous potato salad and thanked me again for standing up to Brenda. David Sutton brought his kids, who ran around my yard with the kind of chaotic energy that probably would have gotten me fined in the old days. Marcus gave a mock toast to my mailbox, which everyone found hilarious. As the sun started to set and people began heading home, I stood in my backyard and looked around at my house, my property, and my neighborhood. For the first time since moving to Pinewood Heights, it actually felt like home. The new HOA board was everything the old one was not. They focused on actual community improvement rather than nitpicking violations. They organized neighborhood events, negotiated better rates for snow removal and landscaping services, and actually listened to homeowners' concerns. Property values went up not because of oppressive rules, but because people genuinely wanted to live there. I even ended up joining the Architectural Review Committee, which I never would have considered under Brenda's leadership. We streamlined the approval process for things like paint colors and minor exterior changes, focusing on legitimate aesthetic concerns rather than using the rules as weapons. As for Brenda, I saw her once more, several months after her sentencing. I was at the grocery store in Traverse City, loading bags into my truck, when I spotted her getting into her Lexus SUV a few rows over. The front end had been repaired, but I could still see a small dent in the bumper that they must have missed. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I considered saying something, maybe even being gracious in victory. But the look on her face was one of pure hatred, completely undiminished by everything that had happened. So I just nodded once, got in my truck, and drove away. Some people never learn. Some people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they cannot see how their actions affect others. Brenda Morrison was one of those people, and while I felt a twinge of pity for how completely her life had unraveled, I also knew that she had done it to herself. That summer was one of the best I had ever experienced. My lawn grew to whatever height I wanted without fear of violation notices. I parked my truck in the driveway whenever I felt like it. I even painted my front door a bold shade of blue that I had always wanted. And the only comment I got from the architectural committee was Marcus saying it looked great. The mailbox, meanwhile, became something of a neighborhood legend. I had replaced it with a sturdy steel post set in concrete and a reinforced box that could probably withstand a tank. Someone even made a joke about putting up a historical marker, and while that never happened, I did occasionally find gifts left in the box from neighbors. A 6-pack of beer, a plate of cookies, a thank you card from Janice. In September, the new HOA board held an election for vice president, and to my surprise, several neighbors nominated me. I declined, explaining that I had no desire for that kind of responsibility, but I was touched by the gesture. It was a far cry from the days of endless violation notices and hostile emails. The legal bills were substantial, even with the court-ordered reimbursements and the small amount I recovered from Brenda's insurance. Richard Kozlowski had been worth every penny, but the final tab was still over $3,000. I did not regret a cent of it. Standing up for myself had not just been about a mailbox. It had been about refusing to be bullied and refusing to let someone abuse their authority without consequences. In October, I received a formal letter from the Michigan Attorney General's office thanking me for my cooperation in their investigation and informing me that the case was now closed. Brenda had made her restitution payments on schedule and was complying with the terms of her probation. There was a note at the bottom, handwritten, that said, "People like you make our job possible. Thank you for not backing down." I put that letter in a folder with all the other documents from the saga, a folder I hoped I would never have to open again but kept just in case. Winter came around again, and with it, another blizzard that dropped 2 feet of snow overnight. I woke up that morning and looked out at my mailbox, standing tall and undamaged at the end of my driveway, barely visible through the swirling white. I smiled, poured myself a cup of coffee, and settled in to wait out the storm. Life in Pinewood Heights had finally become what it should have been all along: peaceful, neighborly, and free from the tyranny of petty bureaucrats with too much time and too little sense. My mailbox stood as a monument to the principle that sometimes you have to fight back against injustice, even when it starts with something as simple as a traffic accident in a snowstorm. The months turned into a year, and the anniversary of the accident came and went without fanfare. I had long since stopped thinking about Brenda Morrison on a daily basis, though occasionally someone would bring up the old days, and we would all shake our heads in amazement at what we had tolerated for so long. The HOA had built up a healthy reserve fund again, carefully managed by Marcus and the new board. They had even managed to negotiate a settlement with Brenda's homeowner's insurance to recover some of the misappropriated funds, which helped ease the financial burden on the rest of us. I learned later, through the neighborhood grapevine, that Brenda and her husband Gerald had sold their house and moved to Florida. Someone said they had heard she was trying to get elected to her new HOA board down there, and we all had a good laugh about that. Those Florida homeowners had no idea what they were in for. My mailbox remained sturdy and intact, delivering my mail without incident through rain, snow, and the occasional confused driver who used my driveway to turn around. I never got another HOA violation notice, and the few times I did interact with the architectural committee, it was pleasant and professional. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that it had taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. The photographs I took in the immediate aftermath of the accident, the emails, the police reports, all of it had been crucial in proving my case. Second, community matters. If I had been the only person willing to stand up to Brenda, the outcome might have been very different. But when the neighborhood came together, change became inevitable. And third, sometimes the smallest incidents reveal the biggest truths about people's character. A simple accident during a blizzard should have been just that, an accident. Apologize, exchange information, file a claim, move on. But Brenda's inability to accept responsibility, combined with her abuse of authority and her vindictive nature, had turned it into something much bigger. In trying to avoid paying her insurance deductible, she had ended up with criminal charges, probation, and a permanent record. I often wondered if she ever looked back and wished she had just been honest that day. If she had just admitted fault, paid for my mailbox, and moved on with her life. But I suspected that people like Brenda rarely engaged in that kind of self-reflection. In her mind, she was probably still the victim, still the wronged party, still convinced that everyone else was the problem. The second winter after the accident was milder, with less snow and warmer temperatures. I actually found myself missing the big storms a little bit, though I would never admit that to my neighbors who complained about shoveling. There was something peaceful about being snowed in, watching the world turn white and quiet outside your window. In February, exactly 2 years after the accident, Marcus organized an anniversary party that he jokingly called Mailbox Freedom Day. About 20 neighbors showed up at my house with food and drinks, and we had a ridiculous ceremony where someone had made a fake historical marker for the mailbox. We installed it as a joke, and I kept expecting the architectural committee to make me take it down, but they thought it was funny too. The marker read, "On this site in February 2024, a mailbox stood its ground against tyranny and won. In memory of all the HOA victims who came before, and in hope for all the reasonable neighbors who came after." It was cheesy and over the top, but it made me laugh, and it captured something true about what had happened. We had not just fought about a mailbox. We had fought about the principle that people should be able to live in their homes without fear of arbitrary punishment. That authority comes with responsibility, and that community is built on mutual respect, not on intimidation. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Janice pulled me aside. She was in her late 70s now, and her granddaughter who had drawn the chalk pictures was in middle school. "Owen," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for standing up to Brenda, but for reminding all of us that we did not have to accept that treatment. A lot of us had just gotten used to it, you know. We thought that was just how HOAs worked. You showed us it could be different." I did not really know what to say to that. I had never set out to be anyone's hero. I had just wanted my mailbox fixed and to not be billed for someone else's mistakes. But I understood what she meant. Sometimes it takes one person refusing to back down to give everyone else the courage to stand up too. "I am glad it worked out," I said. "And I am glad we all stuck together." She patted my arm and headed home, and I was left standing in my driveway, looking at my ridiculous historical marker and my sturdy mailbox, feeling grateful for good neighbors and the end of a very strange chapter in my life. The years that followed were blissfully uneventful from an HOA perspective. The board continued to function smoothly, handling actual community issues without drama. We had the occasional disagreement about budget priorities or rule interpretations, but they were resolved through discussion and compromise, not through threats and violation notices. I kept Richard Kozlowski's business card in my wallet, just in case, but I never had to use it again. The folder with all the documents from the Brenda saga sat in my filing cabinet, gathering dust. Every now and then I would think about throwing it away, but something stopped me. Maybe it was a reminder of what I had overcome. Maybe it was insurance in case Brenda ever tried something again. Or maybe it was just a piece of my personal history that deserved to be remembered. My truck continued to sit in my driveway, unapologetically visible from the street. My grass grew to a reasonable height that I determined based on aesthetics and practicality, not fear of fines. My blue front door welcomed me home every day, a small act of self-expression that would have been forbidden in the old regime. And through it all, my mailbox stood sentinel at the edge of my property, delivering bills and catalogs and the occasional handwritten letter, completely unaware of its role in a neighborhood revolution. It was just a mailbox, steel and concrete and paint, but it represented something more. It represented the idea that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when the opposition seems overwhelming, even when the stakes seem small. Because in the end, it had never really been about the mailbox at all. It had been about dignity, about fairness, about refusing to let petty tyrants make your life miserable just because they could. And that was a lesson worth remembering, a story worth telling, and a victory worth celebrating, even if it had started with nothing more dramatic than a fender bender in a snowstorm and a woman too stubborn to admit she had been wrong. Life in Pinewood Heights continued, peaceful and ordinary, exactly as it should be. And every time I checked my mail, I smiled just a little bit, remembering the day that everything changed and grateful that I had found the courage to fight back.